My name is Daniel Sutherland, and I live in a small but proud town nestled in the shadow of Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado. I am 37 years old, married to the love of my life, Rachel, and we have two beautiful children, Emma and Jake. I work as a mechanic, running my own shop where I fix anything from old farm trucks to high-performance sports cars. It's a simple life, but it's mine. And there's something to be said about the satisfaction of working with your hands, of getting grease under your nails and the hum of an engine under your fingertips. Like most men, I love freedom. The kind of freedom that's written into our very DNA. Freedom that comes from the right to speak your mind, to live your life as you see fit, to make choices, and to stand on your own 2 feet. I was raised in a household where patriotism ran deep. My father served in the military, and his sense of duty and loyalty to this country was something that left a permanent mark on me. Every 4th of July, we would gather as a family at our cabin near the base of the mountain, grilling, drinking beers, and lighting off fireworks. Those were the best times of my life. It was a celebration of what it meant to be an American, to be free, to be part of something bigger than yourself. As the sky darkened and the first firework shot up, exploding in a vibrant burst of colors, I would always feel a deep sense of gratitude. Fireworks to me weren't just loud, bright explosions. They were a reminder of the sacrifices people had made to give me this life. The life where I had the freedom to think for myself, to speak my mind, and to raise my family in peace. My heart would swell with pride. It wasn't just about waving flags or standing in front of a crowd during a parade. No, it was deeper than that. It was about the very soul of this country, the spirit of liberty. That particular year, I remember more vividly than most. The air had a bite to it, the kind that comes with the late summer nights in Colorado. I stood outside, holding a large Roman candle in my right hand, its end pointed toward the sky, waiting for the fuse to ignite. I was standing there with my brother-in-law, Tom, who had recently moved to Colorado with his wife. We were both laughing, trying to light the firework, joking about who could get the biggest bang. Rachel and the kids were inside the cabin, where the warmth from the fire crackled and the smell of my father's famous barbecue filled the air. "You ready for this one?" Tom asked, eyeing the firework as it began to spark. "You bet," I said, smiling as the fuse crackled to life. There's a moment when you hold a firework and you realize the power in your hand. It's like holding a piece of controlled chaos, knowing that in an instant it could all go up in flames. But that's part of the thrill, right? The risk, the reward. It felt symbolic of the very country we were celebrating. Chaos and control in one perfect balance. That's freedom. That's America. But then, without warning, something went wrong. The fuse crackled a little too quickly. The firework went off with a deafening bang, so much louder than I had anticipated, and I felt the blast rip through my right hand. It was an explosion of pain, a searing shock that surged through me like a tidal wave. The firework, the one I'd held just seconds before, was now a violent, fiery piece of debris that had left its mark on me. My hand was destroyed, the bones crushed beyond recognition. My mind tried to process the pain, but it was already too much to handle. I screamed, but the sound didn't seem to come from me. Everything around me blurred. The sounds of laughter, the crackle of the fire, the voices of my family, they all faded into the background as I fell to my knees, clutching what was left of my right hand. I could barely comprehend what was happening. Blood poured from my wound, and I knew, deep down, that this was it. This was the moment everything changed. "Dan! Dan!" I heard Rachel's voice, panicked, calling my name as she rushed outside. I tried to respond, but the pain was too intense. My vision started to tunnel, my breath quickened, and the edges of the world began to soften. Everything felt so distant. I could hear voices, but they were muffled, like I was underwater. The next few seconds, or maybe minutes, I don't know, are a blur. I felt the ground shift beneath me as I lost control of my body. My hand, now mostly gone, was a mangled mess, the blood pooling beneath me in a dark sea. I could feel my heart racing, my body trembling, but I was powerless to do anything about it. And then, with an unexpected calmness, I fainted. But it wasn't the end. It wasn't the end of me. I don't know if it was the shock or the pain or something else entirely, but I slipped away from my body as though it had become irrelevant, as though I was no longer tethered to it. The world around me, once so bright and full of sound, faded into silence, and I was left in a place that felt different. Not a place really, but a state of being. It was as if the very essence of myself, my consciousness, had been released from the prison of flesh and bone. It was here, in that moment, that I would begin to understand what true freedom really meant. I don't know how long I was unconscious, or if I was even unconscious at all. Time seemed irrelevant in that place, if it was even a place. I wasn't sure where I was, but I knew one thing for certain: I was no longer in my body. The weight of my physical form had evaporated, as if I had been liberated from the chains of flesh. There was no pain, no agony from the mangled remains of my hand, no burning heat, no blood or the frantic rush of life slipping away. Instead, I felt light. And not just light in the sense of being unburdened, but light in a deeper, more spiritual way, as though my very essence had become pure, free to drift and expand beyond the confines of what I knew to be my earthly existence. I was aware of my surroundings, though they didn't have the same tangible, solid quality that they once did. I could sense things, but not in the way that you sense physical objects. It was more of a feeling, a vibration, a hum, a presence. The sensation was so strong, so overwhelming that I had to pause, to just be. And then in an instant I realized I was floating. There was no sudden jerk, no violent shift. It wasn't like falling, it was more like gently rising, lifting, almost as if gravity no longer had a claim on me. I looked down, not with eyes, but with my consciousness, and saw myself. There I was, lying in a pool of blood on the ground beneath a starry sky, my body a crumpled form that seemed so far removed from who I now felt I was. It was strange. I could still recognize myself, but it felt as though I was looking at a stranger, someone who had once been me, but was no longer my true self. I could see the paramedics rushing to my aid, their frantic movements clear even in this new, unfamiliar way of perceiving. I watched as they knelt over my body, calling out orders, trying to stabilize me. One of them worked feverishly to stop the bleeding, while another did his best to assess my injuries. The image was surreal. Here I was, floating above it all, watching my own body, as though observing a movie that I had no real connection to. There was no fear, no panic in me. I felt a deep calmness, an overwhelming serenity that washed over me like a warm breeze. I was not worried, not even a little. For the first time in my life, I felt free, and that's when it hit me. This, whatever this was, wasn't an end. It wasn't the cessation of life. It was a transition, a shift. My consciousness, untethered from the restrictions of my human form, was free to explore beyond the walls of my body and mind. I wasn't dying, I was being released into something greater. It was like waking up from a long, deep sleep, except that instead of feeling groggy and disoriented, I felt more alive than ever before. There was no pain, no fear, no anxiety. There was only peace. I thought back to the moments before the explosion, the loud crack of the firework, the searing pain in my hand. But as I lingered in this space, I realized I couldn't hold on to those thoughts. They seemed distant now, like a memory that was fading away. Everything that had defined me, my work, my family, the pride I had in being a part of this country, all of it seemed irrelevant here. It wasn't that I no longer cared about those things, it was that they had lost their hold over me. They were no longer the foundation of who I was. I didn't know how to explain it, but in that moment, I understood something profound. The things I had thought made me free, my independence, my choice, my actions, my patriotism, were still important, but they were not the essence of freedom. They were fleeting. Here in this place, I realized that true freedom wasn't about power or choice or personal liberty. True freedom was something far deeper, something rooted in love, in unity, in connection to the divine. And I felt that connection now. I couldn't explain it fully, but I knew I was no longer alone. Something else was with me, something beyond. I floated there for what felt like an eternity, but time no longer existed in this space. I was neither in a rush nor concerned with the passage of moments. There was no need to do anything but simply be. My attention shifted once more to my body below. It was hard to tell how much time had passed, but it seemed as if my family had arrived. Rachel's face hovered above me, a mask of fear and confusion. She spoke my name, her voice trembling, calling out to me, though I couldn't hear the words. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her that I was okay, that there was nothing to fear, but I knew that wasn't possible. I was beyond words now. I was beyond the limitations of the body. All I could do was observe, to feel, and as I watched the scene below unfold, I felt a tug, a pull, towards something else. It wasn't urgent, but it was undeniable. Something was waiting for me, calling me. There was no fear or hesitation in me. In fact, it felt more like a homecoming, an invitation to explore the next chapter of existence. I didn't know what that next chapter would bring, but I knew that I was ready to step into it. And so I was lifted higher, not in any physical sense, but more in a spiritual way, as if my consciousness was being drawn toward a light, a presence. I didn't know what awaited me at the end of this journey, but I felt no fear. There was only curiosity, anticipation, and an inexplicable sense of peace. And that's when I saw it. A blinding light, brighter than anything I had ever seen in my life. It was so pure, so radiant, that it felt as though it could burn away all darkness, all confusion, all sorrow. I wasn't frightened by it. Quite the opposite. I was drawn to it, as if it held the answers to everything I had ever wondered. This light felt familiar, warm, inviting, and full of love. There was no judgment, no condemnation, only a profound, unexplainable sense of comfort. And as I drifted toward it, I felt my soul stir with anticipation, knowing that something extraordinary was about to happen. The light gradually formed into a figure I had not expected, but one that I immediately recognized. Jesus. He stood before me, bathed in light, his figure both radiating warmth and yet gentle in its presence. His face was full of compassion, his eyes deep with understanding. There was no anger, no frustration, no judgment. There was only love. Endless, unconditional love. And as I stood there feeling the profound peace of his presence, I realized with absolute clarity that I was not lost, not anymore. This was where I was meant to be. And so as I gazed upon him, I felt the first stirrings of freedom. True freedom, the kind that I had never understood before, the kind that transcends the physical, that transcends the limitations of earthly existence. There, in that blinding radiance, I found myself standing face to face with Jesus. His figure stood before me, not just as a man, but as a presence so vast, so filled with light, that words failed me. If I had been overwhelmed by the beauty of the light, it was nothing compared to the presence of the one who stood in it. He was both more and less than I had imagined, a man, yet more than human, his love, his understanding, his compassion infinite. His eyes were the most remarkable part of him. They weren't just eyes, not in the way I'd ever seen eyes before. They seemed to look straight into my soul, stripping away the layers of fear, pride, shame, and pain that had once clung to me like a heavy coat. In his gaze, I felt no judgment, no accusation for the mistakes I had made in my life, no reprimand for my failings as a man. Instead, there was only the deepest kind of love, love that welcomed me fully, just as I was, with all my imperfections, with all my brokenness. For the first time, I felt seen, not as a man who had lived a life full of struggles, pride, and the weight of human existence, but as a soul who, in that very moment, was fully loved and fully free. "You are here because you are loved, Daniel," Jesus said, his voice not just audible but felt. His words didn't enter my ears, they entered my heart. Every syllable seemed to settle into my being, filling me with an undeniable peace. "I don't understand," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I had even spoken the words aloud or just thought them. Jesus smiled, a smile that radiated compassion and understanding. "It is not for you to understand now. What matters is that you are here and you are not lost. You have been seeking freedom your whole life, Daniel, but you have only known it in the way that the world defines freedom." His words stirred something deep inside of me. I had always thought of freedom as the right to make choices, to live independently, to claim my own life. The fireworks, the pride in my country, the celebration of the 4th of July, it all revolved around that idea. Freedom meant power. It meant standing alone, unbound by the chains of others. Jesus seemed to sense my thoughts as they flickered in my mind. His gaze softened even further. "The freedom you sought," he continued, "the freedom you celebrated, is not the kind that lasts. You sought independence from others, from the world around you. But true freedom, Daniel, is not about separation. It is not about power. True freedom is the ability to love, to forgive, to give of yourself without fear." I didn't fully grasp what he was saying, but I felt a stirring within me. A deep, unshakable certainty began to settle in. This was something I needed to understand. This kind of freedom, the kind that came from love and unity, wasn't the freedom I had celebrated on earth. It was something higher, something more spiritual. The world, Jesus continued, teaches that freedom is about control. It teaches that independence from others is the goal. But that is not true freedom. True freedom is the ability to live in love, to be connected to one another and to God, to be free from fear and suffering. And you, Daniel, have been set free. His words began to sink in, but they didn't come all at once. It was as if I was only starting to understand the depth of what he was telling me. I had spent my life trying to define freedom by the things I could control, the fireworks, the celebrations, the pride in my country. But here in this place, surrounded by love, I realized that all of that was temporary. It was fleeting. The true essence of freedom didn't reside in the physical or the political. It resided in the soul, in the love and unity that bound us all together. You are free now, Daniel, Jesus said, his voice warm and patient. But the freedom that you have experienced here is only part of the whole. You must now return, but not in the way you think. I was confused. Return? To what? Why? I don't understand. Jesus extended his hand toward me, and as he did, I felt a surge of energy, a wave of warmth that flooded my entire being. You must return to teach others, Daniel, to show them what true freedom is, not the kind that they chase after in the world, not the kind that is shaped by fear, hatred, and division, but the kind that comes from love, from forgiveness, from unity. The weight of his words settled heavily on my heart. I had never considered it before, but as he spoke, it became clear. My life, my struggles, my accident, it all had meaning, a deeper purpose than I had ever understood. I wasn't here by accident. I wasn't here because of some random twist of fate. I was here because there was a mission for me, a mission to spread the truth of what I was experiencing, to bring the message of true freedom to a world that had long since forgotten it. Don't worry, Daniel. You are not alone in this, Jesus said, his voice wrapping around me like a blanket of comfort. You will carry this light, this truth, but I will walk with you. As he spoke, I felt a sense of peace, unlike anything I had ever known. I felt the weight of my life, the burden of my human existence, begin to lift. The things that once seemed so important, my work, my pride, my nationalism, began to fade into the background, replaced by something far more significant. Freedom, as I had once understood it, was a lie. It was a half-truth, a limited perspective that had held me captive for so long. True freedom was not found in separating oneself from others, but in coming together, in love, forgiveness, and spiritual unity. This was the freedom I had sought my entire life without ever knowing what it truly was. As I stood before Jesus, his eyes full of compassion, I felt a stirring in my soul. This was what I was meant to do. I was meant to go back, to share the message of real freedom, a freedom that could not be found in the world's definitions, but in the heart of God's love. And that's when it happened. I felt myself beginning to shift again. The light around Jesus grew brighter, and I could sense myself being drawn away from him, away from the heavenly peace I had found. You are not done yet, Daniel, he said, his voice reassuring. You will return. But remember what you have learned. Remember the true freedom of the soul. And just like that, I felt myself being pulled away from him, back toward the world I had left behind. As I left the embrace of the divine light, as I felt myself being pulled back into the physical realm, I carried within me the truth of what true freedom was. The words of Jesus echoed in my soul: love, forgiveness, unity. The world I had known, the one I had so proudly celebrated and fought for, was nothing compared to the freedom of the soul that I had just witnessed. I was going back to share this truth, to spread the message of real freedom, not one defined by political boundaries, by flags or fireworks, but one defined by connection, by love, by the light of God. As I drifted further away from the light, I felt my connection to the divine begin to loosen, but the message remained clear in my heart. And though I knew the journey ahead would not be easy, I felt a deep sense of purpose. I had a mission to fulfill, and the world was waiting. And so I began the long journey back, to Earth, to my family, to the people who needed to hear what I had learned. When I left the presence of Jesus, it wasn't as if I was sent back in haste, but more like I was gently drawn away, a sense of peace lingering in my soul. There was no confusion, no pain, no sense of loss. Instead, It felt like a natural transition, like stepping from one place into another, without fear, without resistance. The higher realms, the place I had just encountered, felt like home, more so than anything I had ever known on Earth. And even as I drifted further away from that light, that overwhelming love, I carried a profound sense of serenity, a knowing that I was going where I was meant to go. The journey back wasn't painful. It wasn't even disorienting. As I descended, I felt myself being gently escorted, though I couldn't quite say by whom. I wasn't alone, but I couldn't see any specific figure. Instead, there was a sense of guidance, a soft pull leading me toward what I would soon come to understand as heaven itself. Then something began to change. The light around me softened, and I started to perceive shapes, distant but beautiful. There were rolling hills, radiant fields, and towering trees of such vibrant colors that I could hardly comprehend their beauty. There was no haze, no imperfection, just pure, flawless landscapes bathed in a warm, golden glow. I felt myself being drawn toward this magnificent space, and as I neared, I realized it was a place beyond time, beyond the boundaries I had known. Heaven was not a place of stagnation. It wasn't a place where beings sat idly in rest. No, this was a realm of perfect freedom, freedom that existed without the constraints of the world I had left behind. It was a world where nothing hindered the soul, where the possibilities for creation, for love, and for growth were endless. In this realm, I could see beings, people, though they didn't look exactly like what I had imagined. They were radiant, like light wrapped in flesh, but there was no distinction between them. They weren't bound by race, gender, or age. They were simply souls, beings made in perfect harmony with each other and with the divine. And as I observed them, I noticed that there was something profoundly different about them from how I had perceived people on Earth. They were not isolated or divided. There were no borders between them, no walls to separate one soul from another. There was only unity, a profound connection. Here in heaven, freedom wasn't just a physical liberation, it was a spiritual state. The people I saw were free in a way that transcended anything I had ever thought was possible. Their hearts were open, free from fear, free from judgment, free from the suffocating weight of earthly concerns. And it was this freedom that allowed them to create, to love, to exist as they were meant to be. I began to understand something I had never fully realized before. Freedom, in the truest sense, wasn't about independence. It wasn't about being separate from others, about standing alone. It was about the freedom to be your true self, free from the fear of rejection, free from the chains of pride and ego. Here in heaven, there were no masks, no facades. Every soul was in perfect unity with their divine purpose, and with that unity came the ultimate freedom. In this place, I saw people singing, dancing, and laughing, not for entertainment, but for the sheer joy of existing. They were not motivated by ambition, competition, or personal gain. Instead, their actions were driven by love, by an innate desire to share joy and peace. There was no hunger for power here, no greed or desire to control others. Everyone was free to be their truest self, to live their purpose, to express love and creativity. The concept of suffering didn't exist in this realm because there was nothing to separate one being from another. No walls of resentment, no barriers of fear. Everything was open. Everything was connected. In the distance, I saw others, gathered together in circles of conversation and communion. There was no rush, no hurry. They spoke with one another not to gain something for themselves, but to share, to connect, to grow together in understanding. There was no division. There were no borders between them, not just physical borders, but emotional, psychological, or spiritual ones. They were free in a way I had never understood before. As I walked through this radiant world, I felt the very essence of true freedom seep into me, filling every part of my being. I realized then that the freedom I had known on Earth, celebrating the 4th of July, waving flags, and living with the illusion of independence, was just a shadow of the freedom that could be. The true freedom of heaven was not rooted in separation, it was rooted in unity, love, and acceptance. Here, freedom wasn't a concept tied to individual autonomy, but to divine connection. Every soul, every person here was free because they were connected. No one was alone, no one was apart from the others. And in that realization, I felt my heart swell. This was freedom, The kind of freedom that didn't need to be fought for, the kind that didn't come from violence or struggle. It was simply the natural state of existence when one is fully aligned with love and unity. As I continued to walk through this land of peace, I understood that heaven wasn't just a place you arrived at after death. Heaven was a state of being, a state of heart and mind, a state of freedom where every soul existed as part of the divine whole, where every soul had its place, its purpose, and its expression. The freedom here wasn't just for those who had passed. It was available to everyone who could open themselves to it, who could embrace the truth of love and unity. Heaven wasn't a place you went to, it was a state of being you could live in. I stood still for a moment, allowing the waves of peace and love to wash over me. It was like standing in the heart of the divine. I could sense the presence of God all around me, not as an outside force, but as a pervading reality that bound everything together in perfect harmony. This is true freedom. But then, as I stood there, taking in the beauty and the peace, I felt a pull again. It was soft but insistent, a gentle reminder that this wasn't where I was meant to stay. Not yet, at least. I could feel my connection to Earth, to my mission, to the people I had left behind. I wasn't meant to stay here, at least not for now. There was more for me to do. There was a message I had to bring back with me, a message of real freedom. I took one last look around at the vast, radiant world, at the souls who were living in perfect unity with one another. They were free, not because they were isolated from the world, but because they had embraced their place within it. The truth was clear to me now, freedom true. And so, as I began to ascend once more, returning to the earth I had left behind, I knew that I was not coming back alone. The love and unity of heaven would accompany me, and I would carry the message of true freedom to everyone I met. There was work to be done, but now I knew the way. As I was drawn away from the heavenly peace, a strange sensation overcame me, like the shift between light and shadow. I felt myself descending, no longer drifting in the comforting embrace of heaven, but being pulled towards something darker, heavier. The radiant warmth of the world I had just visited began to fade, and with it, the serenity that had filled me. I could sense the familiar weight of Earth's struggles slowly creeping back into my being, pulling me toward the reality I had once known, one fraught with conflict, division, and suffering. The transition was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but then the shift became unmistakable. The light around me dimmed and the vision before me began to change. What was once a vibrant, radiant landscape now became a blur of smoke and shadow. I felt a deep, gnawing weight in my chest as the world I had left behind reappeared in stark contrast to the freedom I had just experienced. I saw before me a landscape I recognized, but it was not the world of love and unity I had just witnessed in heaven. It was the earth, my earth, and yet not my earth. A world where people fought for their freedom, not in peace, but in violence, in separation, in fear. I saw war-torn cities devastated by conflict. Entire communities divided by hatred, by ideology, by the belief that freedom could only be obtained by defeating someone else. There were people locked in cages, people standing on opposite sides of borders, people who had forgotten what freedom truly meant, enslaved by their desires, their fears, and their resentments. The air was thick with tension, with a sense of despair. It was as if the very fabric of the world was torn, each soul pulling in a different direction, each heart burdened by the weight of their individual battles. I saw the poverty-stricken masses, desperate for a taste of freedom that had eluded them, yet unable to break free from the chains of their circumstances. There were politicians and leaders shouting at one another, each claiming to hold the key to the nation's freedom, but all of them trapped in cycles of power and greed. The concept of freedom had been distorted. War had been waged in its name, and people had fought to assert their independence, only to find themselves more divided than ever. I saw families torn apart by division, by fear, by conflict, by the inability to understand each other. Neighbors who once lived in harmony now stood in opposition, consumed by hatred and mistrust. The freedom that they sought was not the freedom of the soul, but the freedom of the self, the freedom to be separate, to assert one's will over others. But the worst part, the part that struck me most deeply, was the fear that permeated everything. People were not free. They thought they were, but they were prisoners. prisoners of their own minds, of their pride, of their unwillingness to understand each other, to forgive each other. I saw the faces of those who had forgotten the true meaning of freedom. They fought for a vision that was narrow and self-serving. They didn't see the connections that bound them together. They only saw the divisions. The idea of freedom had been hijacked by fear, by greed, by the desire to dominate and control, and in doing so, true freedom had slipped further out of reach. The world, as I now saw it, was a reflection of a deep spiritual emptiness. The struggles for physical freedom, for independence, were meaningless without the spiritual freedom that comes from love and unity. People were chasing an illusion. They were fighting for something that could never be won through conflict or division. They had forgotten that true freedom comes from within, from reconciliation, from understanding, from connection to God and to each other. The vision was overwhelming, and as I witnessed the state of the world, I felt a deep sorrow in my heart. How had things gotten this way? How had the world become so consumed with separation, with the idea that freedom could only be found through conflict and domination? And then, as if in answer to my thoughts, a voice, calm, gentle, yet filled with urgency, spoke in my mind. The world is at a tipping point, Daniel. Jesus' voice resonated within me. They have misunderstood what true freedom is. They have confused independence from others with independence from fear, from suffering, from sin. They have fought for freedom in the name of power, not in the name of love. They have forgotten that true freedom is not found in the fight for separation, but in the unity of love. The weight of his words settled heavily on me. I had witnessed the very thing that had troubled me for so long, the corruption of the concept of freedom. The nation I had once so proudly called my own, the celebrations I had once cherished, the fireworks I had once so eagerly lit into the sky, they were all part of this larger illusion. I had spent my life fighting for a freedom that was defined by borders, by politics, by the desire to dominate others. I had believed that freedom was found in independence. But I saw now, as I stood amidst the ruins of the world's struggles, that true freedom was never meant to be about separation. It was about unity. I could feel the urgency in Jesus' words, the sense that time was running out. The world was slipping further into chaos, and people, good people, were being consumed by the lie that freedom could only be found through division, through the assertion of personal will over the will of others. "You must return," Jesus said, and his voice was filled with a sense of profound compassion. "You must help them see the truth, Daniel. The freedom they seek cannot be found in war or power. It can only be found in love, in forgiveness, in unity. You will help them understand that true freedom is spiritual, not physical. It is not about gaining control over others. It is about surrendering to the love that binds them all together." His words pierced through me, and I knew deep in my heart that he was right. The struggles I had witnessed, the wars, the division, the oppression, were the result of humanity's misunderstanding of what freedom truly was. And it was up to me, to those who had seen the truth, to share it with the world. I wasn't being sent back to fight for national freedom, to restore political power or personal rights. I was being sent back to help people understand the true meaning of freedom, the freedom that comes from spiritual unity, from love, from the willingness to forgive and to connect. The freedom that Jesus had shown me was not of this world, but it was the key to healing the world. The vision of the world's struggles began to fade as Jesus' words settled deep within me. I was ready. I knew my mission now. And as I felt myself being pulled back from this vision, back toward the life I had once known, I knew that the burden of that mission was one I was prepared to carry. I had seen the truth. Now I had to bring it to others. And though the world would fight me, though many would resist, I knew that the love I had witnessed, the true freedom I had been shown, was stronger than anything this world could throw at me. And so, as the vision of Earth's struggles faded into the distance, I prepared to return with the message of freedom that was not bound by the limitations of the flesh, the boundaries of nations, or the walls of ego. I was returning with a message of love, of unity, of true freedom. But before I could fully return to the physical world, I felt a momentary pause, like a breath held in the universe itself. And in that moment of stillness, I knew that the work was just beginning. True freedom would not come through conflict. it would come through connection. And that was the message I would carry back. The stillness that hung in the air before me was thick with the weight of the task I was about to undertake. It felt like time had paused, just long enough for me to fully understand the gravity of what was being asked of me. As I began to feel my consciousness drift away from the vision of Earth's struggles, there was a gentle but firm pull that guided me back toward the presence of Jesus. He stood before me once again, radiant with the same boundless love and compassion that had enveloped me before. But this time there was a profound urgency in his expression. His eyes, still filled with infinite love, also carried the burden of a world teetering on the brink of something terrible. "I need you to hear me, Daniel," Jesus said, his voice softer than a whisper but resonating deeply in my soul. The world is at a tipping point. The divisions that people have created, the separations, the hatred, they have reached a level where they threaten not only the peace of humanity, but the very freedom that I came to offer. I could feel the seriousness in his words, as if the world's fate hung in the balance, waiting for someone to take the message of love and unity seriously. It wasn't just a moment of quiet reflection anymore. There was a deep, pressing need for action. "Freedom, Daniel," he continued, his tone shifting with the weight of his mission, "has been misunderstood. People think it is about power, about domination, about standing alone in independence from others. They are trapped in the lie that to be free, they must be separate, must stand against those they see as other. But this freedom they seek is fleeting. It is hollow, and in their search for freedom, they are only sowing more discord, more division." I felt the urgency of his words in every fiber of my being, like a calling I could not ignore. The world, the very thing I had once celebrated as a bastion of freedom, was sick, poisoned by misunderstanding. It wasn't that people didn't want to be free. It was that they didn't understand what freedom truly was. They were trapped in their own illusions of separateness, fighting battles that only deepened the divisions between them. "True freedom, Daniel," Jesus said, his gaze fixed on me with an intensity that was both loving and sorrowful, "is found not in separation but in unity. It is found not in asserting independence from others, but in finding deep spiritual connection with God and with each other. It is found in love and forgiveness, in reconciliation, not in conflict. You must go back and tell them this. Tell them that the freedom they have fought for, the freedom they believe in, is not the freedom that I spoke of. The real freedom is the freedom to love, to forgive, to be one with each other." His words echoed through me, sinking deeper than anything I had ever heard before. My entire life I had fought for freedom, physical freedom, national freedom, independence from tyranny. And yet, standing before the King of all creation, I now realized that I had misunderstood everything. Freedom wasn't about the ability to do whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. It wasn't about fighting for my right to be separate, to carve out my own space in the world. Freedom was about connection. Freedom was about living in harmony, with love and peace as the foundations of every interaction. True freedom was the freedom to be in full communion with one another, to recognize that our individual destinies were interwoven with those of everyone around us. It was a freedom that transcended the boundaries of race, nationality, religion, and ideology. It was a freedom that existed only in the spirit of unity. "You must go back," Jesus continued, his voice now full of both tenderness and resolve. "The world is blind, Daniel. The world has forgotten what true freedom means. They think they are fighting for it, but they are only fighting against each other, against the very nature of freedom itself. They are trapped in the cycle of fear and division, and only love and reconciliation can break that cycle." I felt the gravity of his words settle upon me. He was calling me to return, not just as someone who had experienced a near-death encounter, but as a messenger, an ambassador of the true freedom he had shown me. There would be no glory in this mission, no fame. There would be only struggle, resistance, and the unwavering call to speak the truth, even when it was rejected. "The path you are about to walk will not be easy," Jesus said, as though reading my thoughts. "People will resist you, Daniel. They will not want to hear the truth. They are comfortable in their illusions, but you must persist. The truth of true freedom is a weapon more powerful than any force on earth, but it must be shared with love, with patience, and with unwavering faith. You must show them that the freedom they seek is not political, not material. It is spiritual. It is the freedom to be one with each other, to live without fear, to love without condition. As he spoke, I felt a weight on my shoulders, an immense responsibility. The world was not just fractured, it was on the verge of collapse, drowning in the myth of separation. And it would take more than words to heal it. It would take action. Action rooted in love, in forgiveness, in the kind of freedom that I had witnessed in heaven. You have seen the vision, Daniel. You know the truth now, Jesus continued, his voice now filled with a deep and gentle compassion. I am sending you to speak the truth, to help those who are lost find their way back to the freedom of love. You will go back with a message, a mission. The freedom of the world can only be restored through unity, through love. Tell them this. In that moment, I felt the last vestiges of the serenity I had known in heaven begin to fade. I was being called back, but I knew that my return would not be the same as before. I would carry the message of true freedom with me, the message that the world desperately needed to hear. The firework that had once defined my understanding of freedom was now a symbol of my transformation, a reminder of the price of true freedom and the journey I had just begun. Before I could even fully comprehend the magnitude of my mission, I felt myself being gently drawn back toward the world I had left behind. My consciousness began to spiral downward, back to my body, back to earth. As I descended, I heard one last message from Jesus, a whisper of reassurance that would stay with me for the rest of my days. You are not alone, Daniel. Go with my love and the power of truth. You will awaken hearts to the freedom that I offer. It is already within them. You just need to help them remember. And with that, the divine presence faded, and I felt myself being pulled back toward my body, the world I had once known awaiting my return. I had been given my mission, and it was time to return. Time to bring the message of true freedom to a world desperately in need of it. The journey wasn't over yet. The first thing I became aware of was a sharp pain, a sharp physical pain that jolted me back to consciousness. The pain in my hand, the very hand I had lost to the explosion, was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the raw, violent kind of pain that came from an injury. No, this was different. It was a strange, numbing kind of ache, as if my body, still reeling from the trauma, was struggling to reintegrate with my spirit. My hand was gone, my fingers a memory, replaced by the raw stump of what had once been whole. I felt disoriented at first. My senses felt dull, like I was submerged in thick water, unable to fully grasp the world around me. I could hear voices, but they sounded muffled, distant, like I was on the edge of a dream, not fully awake yet. Then I heard them, the medical staff. The frantic murmurs of doctors and nurses. Their words didn't make much sense at first. Nothing felt real to me. I wasn't sure if I was still floating in the serene space between life and death, or if I had returned to the harshness of reality. But then, slowly, everything began to sharpen. The harsh, fluorescent lights above me flickered into focus. The sterile scent of antiseptic, the soft beep of machines, the rustle of paper gowns and plastic gloves. I could feel the cold of the hospital room, the texture of the sheets beneath me, and the buzzing of my own consciousness waking up from the surreal visions I had seen. But even as I tried to adjust to the physical world, there was an undeniable sense that something had changed in me. Something profound. The pain, the sharp sting that should have brought me back to my senses fully didn't faze me. I felt strangely calm, strangely at peace. There was no panic, no fear of the future. In fact, it felt like I was being cradled in a softness that the world could never offer, a warmth that spoke to me in ways that words couldn't. I glanced around and saw the concerned faces of the medical staff gathered around me. They were frantic, moving fast, talking quickly to each other, clearly unaware of the calm that had settled in me. One of the doctors looked directly at me and gasped. "He's awake!" she exclaimed. "How is he awake? How is he conscious?" I could hear the surprise, the disbelief in her voice. She checked my vitals with urgency, her hands trembling slightly, and then glanced at the monitor as though it might offer some explanation. A nurse moved in quickly to check the bandages on my wound. I could feel the dressing, the tightness of the gauze around my wrist, the place where my hand used to be. But all of this felt distant, as though it was happening to someone else. In that moment, I realized that I had returned. My body was here. But my spirit, the part of me that had seen the true meaning of freedom, wasn't entirely tied to it. I had glimpsed something far beyond the suffering of this world, something far greater than the pain of my injury. I had glimpsed a peace, a love that transcended the limitations of the body and the struggles of the earth. I tried to speak, to tell the doctors that I was fine, that I was more than fine. But my throat felt dry, like the words wouldn't come out properly. A nurse quickly brought me water, and I drank it gratefully. As the cool liquid slid down my throat, I felt more grounded, more in my body, and yet the sense of peace didn't leave me. It was as though I had left a part of myself behind in heaven, and that part would never be lost to me again. The nurse spoke gently, asking if I knew what had happened, if I understood the extent of my injuries. I nodded, though I didn't fully care about the specifics of my injury. What I had experienced, the message I had received, was far more important. I could feel the urgency, the weight of the mission ahead of me, the message of love and unity that I had been entrusted with. It burned in my chest like a fire, stronger than any pain I could feel. As the hours passed, I began to regain full awareness of my surroundings. I knew I was in a hospital room in Colorado Springs. The sterile walls, the smell of antiseptic, and the quiet hum of hospital machinery all felt strangely foreign, like they belonged to another life. The life I had led before the accident seemed distant, almost irrelevant now. In its place was a clarity I had never known. I could hear the nurses and doctors discussing my condition, marveling at my quick recovery. They couldn't understand how I was so alert, so aware, given the severity of my injuries. But in that moment, I didn't need to explain it to them. They didn't need to know that I had walked through heaven and returned with a message that was far more important than any physical recovery. I knew the pain I had endured was just the beginning, a physical manifestation of a far deeper transformation. I could hear the faint sound of someone crying in the hallway, the muffled voice of a family member whose loved one was likely in their own crisis. And then the sound of fireworks in the distance. The 4th of July, my favorite holiday, the day I had always celebrated with fireworks, with family, and with a profound sense of patriotic pride. The echo of the explosions in the distance made me smile, though it wasn't the same kind of smile I would have given years ago. The fireworks were beautiful, yes, but they weren't freedom. Not anymore. Not in the way I had once believed. As I lay there in the hospital bed, I began to realize something profound. The freedom I had always cherished, the freedom of independence, of standing alone as an individual, of celebrating my country's victory over oppression, was only a shadow of the freedom that mattered. True freedom was found not in the fireworks that lit the night sky, but in the freedom to love without boundaries, to forgive without hesitation, to unite without judgment. The freedom I had once fought for in national terms was nothing compared to the freedom I had witnessed in heaven. A freedom that bound all people together in love, in peace, and in unity. The more I thought about the message that Jesus had given me, the more I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. I had been shown the way, and now it was up to me to share it with others. But how? How could I possibly convince the world of this kind of freedom when they were so caught up in their own wars against each other, against themselves, against the very idea of unity? The answer, I realized, wasn't in grand speeches or political debates. It was in the small, everyday acts of love and connection. It was in forgiving those who had wronged me, even if they hadn't asked for forgiveness. It was in reaching out to the people around me, showing them that true freedom didn't come from winning, from defeating an enemy, but from building bridges, from seeking unity over division. My body might have been broken, but my spirit had been awakened. And now, I had a mission to share the message of true freedom. I would start with the people around me, the doctors, the nurses, my family. I would tell them my story, the story of the firework accident, the near-death experience, the vision of heaven, and the message Jesus had given me. I would tell them that the true freedom they were seeking, whether in their countries, their communities, or their hearts, wasn't found in power or separation. It was found in love and unity. It was found in the deep spiritual connection to each other and to God. And though some would reject it, some would laugh, some would ignore me, I knew that the truth would shine through in time. It always did. The light of love and unity was more powerful than any force on earth. I had seen it, felt it, and I knew that it would change the world if enough people embraced it. As I looked out the window of the hospital room, the night sky darkened, and the distant sound of fireworks filled the air. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for the world. Let them see the truth, Lord, I prayed softly. Let them understand that true freedom comes from love, and in my heart, I knew it had already begun.